So we had a number of stories that played out over the summer involving various members of the police department's upper echelon. And they had, over the course of their careers, accumulated a large number of harassment complaints from female cops, from female civilians. And the way the department handled it was to do virtually nothing. A lot of the commanders had been up for promotions over the years and continued to get the promotions, even with the complaints pouring in. And we, as usual, like any good story, it starts off with tips from our sources. The hard thing, Barbara and I were just sort of talking about, she was giving me some talking points.
Barbara's an old hand at this award thing, I believe.
She just couldn't be bothered.
She's one of the big dogs.
But the hard thing is getting members of the police department to kind of cooperate with us, because there is sort of an atmosphere of fear that a lot of them work under, whether it would be just sort of raising their own concerns with their commanders, with behaviors that they see, and certainly speaking out to us. You know, it's not going to earn them any friends. If anything, it's going to earn them an overnight shift, in an undesirable district. So there was an ongoing process of trying to get members of the department to cooperate with us. And it's not enough just to get people to say that they heard something or they saw something. A lot of times what we really want to have are documents that would show the department was aware of some of these things. And we had a lot of long nights of running back and forth, making panic cell phone calls, trying to get documents. And there was, at one point, I think we got just completely hysterical. But eventually, we did get a lot of information. A lot of officers came forward and spoke on the record about their concerns.
Now, one of the key figures in the series of stories is someone who's very high up in internal affairs.
Yeah.
Someone who, if things were working properly, would actually be investigating these complaints rather than generating. How did that complicate the story, or how did that affect how you did the reporting?
Well, it was interesting because, like you say, in a perfect world, the people who work in internal affairs will be keeping other officers in check, and they'll be making sure that people who don't uphold their basic values, which are honor and integrity, that they'll be punished or they'll be held accountable. And what we found was one of the highest ranking members of internal affairs was himself being accused of coercing a female aide into a sexual relationship. I don't know that it necessarily complicated it. I think it probably complicated it from the police department for a little bit, because it put them in a position where, they don't want to necessarily come right out and say, yeah, you're right, this is a big problem. Mm-hmm. But when you have someone in internal affairs being accused of behavior like this, even they have to step back and say, we have to take a close look and figure out what's going on here. And I'm sure they're doing that right now.
Okay, you work for a newspaper with a long history of lifting the lid on the Philadelphia police. Barbara obviously won a Pulitzer Prize and this award last year for doing the same kind of work. How does that, did that in any way impact either your ability to get people to talk, or whether make people even more wary of you when you first address them?
I think a little of both. Because you certainly do have some members of the department who automatically resent us for the type of work that we do, because it doesn't portray them in a positive light, obviously. But then at the same time, I think you have some officers who do feel maybe more emboldened to step forward and say something because they know we'll stick with it. And we're fortunate that we have an editor, Michael Days, and Gar Joseph, who's not checking his phone.
That's an upset.
Who are pretty, they're very strong in backing us, and giving us the freedom to take the time to really dig into these stories and report them. And we know they have our backs, because there is going to be heat generated from it. You're going to have, at one point, there were some officers who were trying to arrange a protest outside of our office, talking about lawsuits. And we've been sued before. That'll happen. We're probably going to get sued again soon, I'm sure. But I know, just knowing that we have their backing and that they believe in the work that we're doing, it certainly it emboldens you to keep at it and to keep going until you know you're hitting a nerve.
Sort of interesting irony in reading this story is that compared to other sequences of stories like this that we see with government officials, particularly police departments, Commissioner Ramsey was relatively forthcoming with you in terms of being quoted for the record and talking about what was going on. You just didn't get the official statement. Yet at the same time, some of the people you were looking into were in the process of being promoted while you're doing the stories. So I'm wondering, A, was it unusual, just sort of your interactions with the commission? B, if you can sort of update everyone on where things stand now. These stories were done 6-7 months ago.
Sure. I give Ramsey a lot of credit because he is very forthcoming. He doesn't really pull any punches. And I mean, I think he's probably at a point now where he expects these phone calls, once or twice a month. And he always does take the time to take our questions, and he's always very candid, and I appreciate that. But I think there's, part of him is very much, I think, outraged by some of the behavior that we've seen and that he's seen. But there are limits. He can't sort of throw the entire department out. And a lot of these guys are members of his top brass. So if he were to go in and just start tossing them all aside because of these allegations, I think it would make his job pretty difficult. And it's unfortunate because there are a lot of police officers who are really good public servants. A lot of our sources are good officers. They believe in serving the city and trying to help people.
I mean, there are a couple of officers who you quote in the story, or you recount the instance where their integrity sort of jumps off the page in contrast to some of the behavior.
But with the issue of the promotions, it did kind of get a little bit contentious because we continued to hit on him with this issue of saying, well, how could you promote these guys if they have these complaints? And the position he kind of took was the complaints alone weren't enough to prevent them from being promoted. So we had one captain by the name of Anthony Washington who had more than a dozen complaints, some of which were from officers, male officers, female officers, white, black. I mean, there was no, sort of everybody across the spectrum had bad experiences with him. And he held off on the promotion for a little while, but he eventually still got it, as did another guy, Carl Holmes. So I think you can't help but maybe feel a little frustrated to see, after we sort of lay out these arguments, very plain to see. You have the complaints, you have other officers who are saying, yeah, this is wrong. And at the end of the day, they're still moving ahead. It does make you wonder.
Any follows in the works?
Well, I mean.
I knew you would.
Come on, man, get it up. Say it.
No. Okay, Jeff, you are now officially the LeBron James of the Weiss Awards.
Wow.
Having won twice.
I'll take it.
I'm from